everyone seems to have an opinion about minimum wage, and when you increase it, do prices go higher? Well, we all know from experience they do, and we all know from the horse's mouth they do, because bosses and owners say all the time, if I have to raise wages, I have to either raise the price of what I sell or raise the charge for the service, or I have to lay people off, or something's got to give, right? I can't take that out of my own pocket. I mean, I've got a summer house to pay for. I've got 4 luxury vehicles I have to pay for and insure. I mean, I've got all of these expenses. I'm going to have to pass that on to the consumer. So this is what we have with minimum wage in this country, at least. It's very kind of grotesque what happens. So I have some answers, but first I wanted to get into what the problem is and where the problem comes from. Well, the problem comes from academia. It comes from the academic elites who are vetted by the power class, who spew this kind of garbage, and because they have professor in front of their name, or they're a doctor or whatever, we're supposed to just believe it as the gospel. This is the way that it is. No, not with me. I'm not the one. I check people out. I see what they're about. I don't just take your word for it. I'm done with that. I've been screwed over so many times taking people's words for it. I'm done with it. I'm a critical thinker. I scored the top of my class in critical thinking. I got a really good grade. I'm really good at it. So I'm going to apply all of that prowess to Dr. Judd Patton. I'm sorry you're going to be the target of this, because there's all kinds. I could have picked any. It just so happens that this guy got picked. So don't pick on him like I'm going to. He just does what he does, and people let him get by with it, so it's not all his fault. So what did he do? What did he do? Well, besides be a member of the United Church of God and try to bring that into it, he wrote this paper. And in this paper, he has some very non-compelling reasons why minimum wage law is a violation to not only the mechanics of the market, but to the very principles of freedom and liberty itself. Of course he is, right? So let's go through this really, really quickly, and I have a few points that I'm going to pick out, some of the main ones, and you're welcome to check it out yourself. Just keyword search that title, you'll find it. So he's going to cite somebody named Adam Smith. We're going to talk about him in a minute. But in the first part of this, he makes an assertion that I agree with, but it's kind of reductive and it leaves out some very important variables. So you can't take it at just this face value. There are some assumptions that you have to make in order for this to hold true. So basically what he's saying in itself is a principle. So what does he say? He says that a fundamental proposition of economic science is that good intentions are not the essential prerequisite to sound public policy. A corollary proposition is that compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. Of a truth, only policies rooted in principle will succeed. Policies in defiance of principle, even though advocated with the best of intentions and compassion, will fail. And this is kind of a true statement. So we're going to all start on the same square. Sort of. We're going to assume all of our assumptions are the same. So double assuming of assumptions is always a safe thing, right? So he goes down here. This is from 1996, when minimum wage went from $4.25 an hour to $5.15 an hour. And we haven't really gone much higher than that, even though things are substantially more expensive. Things have gone up in price whether we've increased minimum wage or not. So a form of price control, let's look at this here. This is the first strong statement that he makes. And it's the first one that's really wrong. So let's start out with a wrong statement. A form of price control, minimum wage laws strike at the very heart of the free enterprise system. It does in the way that it was delivered by Adam Smith, but it doesn't in the way that Dr. Judd Patton is going to use it. He is going to use poor Adam Smith's words against us. So rest in peace there. So from The Wealth of Nations, that's a shortened title, He's going to quote this guy, Adam Smith. The good doctor, claims that he's the father of economics. He's actually the father of modern economics. Important distinction. And by modern, I mean from 1776. I don't know what's changed in 250 years that could maybe reshape how we look at economics. But I'm sure there's something there. So relying on a principle of 1776 for something as complex and intricate as our working environment nowadays. Keep in mind, in 1776 we had a slave economy, women couldn't vote or own property, and we had an open frontier of land that we stole from some First Nations. So we had all that going for us. Well, it all changed. So whatever principles you had in 1776 might need to modify those just a little bit. So I would be careful when I invoke the name of Adam Smith when I'm talking about anything with modern flavor. That's the first problem. Next, if any shackling of prices or costs distorts the communication mechanism of capitalism, providing bad information to market participants. That's true, in the same sense that if my eye isn't messed up, I can see the light that comes through it, the way that it's given to my eyeball. But say if my eyeball's misshapen, it's not working correctly, then I need some correction. So I wear glasses, and then that changes the way that the light goes into my eye, so that when my eye makes that light wrong, the two things cancel one another out and I get something that's right. Let's apply that analogy to what he's saying here. Government intervention is not shackling. It can be, but when it's done smart, it's a correction. Now, if I put an eye patch on, well, that's not the right correction. If I put glasses on, that's the right correction. So one is a shackling and one is a distortion. So we need to be really careful about what we call what. Because, yeah, in some cases, this is true what he's saying. But not in every case, and not in a lot of cases that he's trying to apply it to. So he's kind of being confusing here, and it falls apart whenever you can apply it to an analogy that's very similar, and you could apply it to another analogy, and if it holds, it's pretty consistent, then it's fairly reliable. And if it falls apart, well, then what? You don't count on it. So down here he talks about his 3 indictments against minimum wage laws. And he says that a dispassionate analysis then reveals that minimum wage laws violate 1, the principle of employment, that wages and salaries of employees must correspond to the market value of their services. Well, let's talk about that. That is kind of a true statement. This is a true statement, what he's saying here. But the problem with it is how the product value isn't supplying enough value for everyone to take their part. So something has to give. So even though this is true, it's not working in modern working environment, and I'm going to explain that in just a second, but even though it's true, it's not working. It's not holding to it. So let's go to the next one real quick here. The invisible hand principle that the free market price system is absolutely essential to coordinate economic activity, thereby making full production and full employment achievable. The invisible hand applies to bake sales. It applies to mattresses. It applies to a lot of things, but one of the things it doesn't apply to is the employer-employee relationship, and that's because the equilibrium is thrown off to begin with. The invisible hand makes a couple of assumptions. The first of those assumptions is that both sides are pretty much even in their bargaining power, in their position. And that's not true. An employee might only have 2 or 3 employers with which to try to negotiate a fair wage. while an employer may have thousands of employees with which to negotiate what he feels is a fair labor price. So it's not balanced there. So how could it possibly find equilibrium? Well, it can't. And that's why the invisible hand doesn't even apply to the employer-employee relationship. So it can't be flawed. It can't be it can't violate any laws because it doesn't even apply. It's mutually exclusive to the situation itself. And this is coming from a professor of economics. This is what's absolutely freaking shocking to me. The last thing, even more shocking if you can believe it. 3, a moral principle that false witness is wrong. Now what does this mean? Well, it means that the moral principle that minimum wage laws distort the prosecutor is essential for the employment there by bearing false witness. Minimum wage laws violate a fundamental Judeo-Christian moral precept. Is basically what he's trying to say here. That what you're making isn't worth what we're paying you for it, and that is kind of a wrong thing. You're not going to sell a 20-cent comb for $20. Makes sense, right? So that's kind of a valid statement, but it doesn't really apply here either, because the employee doesn't set the price of things. The employee doesn't decide what's being made. The employee doesn't get to choose what the value of their work, what it transforms into in order for them to get something from it. So what does that mean? Do I have any more of this to talk about? Is there any? No. Oh, go to hell with that laissez-faire crap. So I broke it down a little bit. We have 1 unit of work equals a certain percentage of home, food, and security. And this is how it was back in the 1776 days. If we're going to use 1776 as a model for our economics, we'll use it as an analogy. So ideally, since humans are well adapted to surviving, we can produce more than 100% of what we need to survive. Isn't that amazing? I mean, civilization has risen out of this property of being a human. So when you're farming, if everything's going well, you're producing much more than what you need. So you have a surplus, and you can share that surplus, or you can in some ways preserve that surplus, so if things aren't going well, you have that to fall back on. So you're at least have, most of the time, unless things really, really go bad, you have 100% of what you need. You have 100% of home, 100% of food, and 100% of security for 1 unit of work, on average. Like I said, maybe some years aren't so great, maybe some years are a little better, and on average it's going to be, we'll say, 100%, because you want some time off, right? So you're going to make sure that your surplus, your little extra, is only going to be as much as you need, and then you're just going to take some time off. You're going to go fishing, whatever it is. Enjoy your life a little bit. So you're not going to be working so hard that you're generating like 3,000% of surplus in order to have that for what, right? So what happens if things go bad? Well, then you have to subtract some things away. Like I said, you have a bad year, you're not going to have a good crop. Say you spend all that work planting seeds. Your field is ready to grow and you can reap your harvest, but then there's a flood and it wipes everything out. Well, you've lost 100% of the work that you've put into that. So you just have to subtract that 1 unit of work. That 1 unit of work didn't get anything out of that. And you're going to have that happen. You're going to have some bad times. But we wouldn't have survived as a human species if we weren't able to average it out to have a little bit extra. And that's the tradition of working and the value that you get from the work that you do. That's in the olden days. We have no longer this option, because this is only a dream for very few people. Most of us have to work for somebody, which leads into our next slide. The picture I chose is on purpose. So in the employee relationship, you have one unit of work and it gets you the same thing, a certain percentage of home, food, and security. Now with all this innovation and everything, your one unit of work, it produces a lot. It's really productive. So you have a lot of surplus. Well, where does that surplus go? Well, that surplus goes to your employer and the investors. So in this relationship, you're always guaranteed 100%. Ideally, you're guaranteed 100% of your home, 100% of your food, 100% of your security for just one unit of work. But you're making a lot more than that. And all that extra stuff is going to your employer and going to the investors. And that's fair, right? So long as you get your 100% for your one unit of work, that's fair. But in modern times, that's not what happens. In modern times, what happens is because the value of whatever is being produced is so low that there simply isn't enough money in order for the employer and the investor class to get theirs. So it has to come out of somewhere, and it comes out of our 100%. So now we're making less than 100% of our one unit of work for home, food, and security. So now maybe we're getting 80% of a home, 80% of food, 80% of security for our one unit of work. Well, this keeps dropping. This keeps dropping. And what minimum wage law does is it says, this is what one unit of work should get you. And if you're an employer, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever you are, if your business model can't supply a product that produces the value of one unit of work, 100% home, food, and security for that worker, then it has no business being in business. Figure it out. You need to get a model that does that, where employees get 100%, not 80%, not 50%, not 20%, at least 100%, and they will make for you extra so that you can have, and that's fair. That doesn't happen. It can, but it doesn't happen because people are too goddamn selfish. It's really, really simple. People make it confusing, like Professor Judd W. Patton with his arguments of tradition from 250 freaking years ago that no longer even applies. And you know what? It didn't apply in the way that he used it. And it can't apply in the way that it's being used in modern times. That started at the robber baron age, the turn of the 19th century. That's when they started doing all this, when people started asking for more. You want to know when they started using minimum wage as a bad thing? When these kids were working in factories. This is laissez-faire capitalism right here. Children working in factories. And if you use Dr. Patton's arguments, these kids would still be working there. Well, not these. They're pretty old by now, but you'd still have kids working there in dangerous equipment. Because, kids eat less. It's a smart business decision. They require less resources, don't have to pay them as much. There's all kinds of goods for having kids working, right? Let's not think about the bad things. Let's just pay attention to all the good things if we make kids work. That's how this shit happens. And Dr. Patton, shame on you. Shame on Bellevue University. Shame on all of the economics professors that allow this to happen. And shame on it that it's been going on for 4 decades. For just one person. This is just one. This is all over. This is rampant. No wonder nothing good ever happens. Because of these son of a bitches. So I hope this has helped lessen some of the confusion and has fortified you so the next time someone comes at you with some of this bullcrap, you at least have an arsenal to say, look, that's not how it works. At the very least, it's opened your mind to the possibility that maybe what these people are saying is wrong, and the policies that we've had to live under, at least I've had to live under for the last 50 years, have done nothing but hurt the United States, make it less powerful, less great. I don't know. Good luck with this one. I'm going to continue on the subject in depth with a couple things that I touched on that I wasn't able to talk about in depth here later on. So if you like these, hit subscribe, hit like. Let me know what you think if you have an opinion. If you don't agree, let me know, because I may have missed something here. Until next time, you guys, thanks for listening and take care.